Hi, my name is Dave Wally, and this is another video about Every Chord Ever. I'll take a closer look at the wheel of music, the key piece, and the chord pieces, touching on more advanced topics. I don't mean more complicated, just a hint at musical wisdom that led to the design of these physical pieces. Let's start with the wheel of music diagrams on the bottom of the box. The wheel is just like a 12-hour clock face. The analogy is a great one for music. The way we count to 12 o'clock and then start over again at 1 is exactly what we need. So sometimes o'clock refers to a musical note. All the even numbers on the wheel are exactly where you expect them to be. 12, 2, 4, 6, 8, and 10. Only the odd numbers are in odd positions, exactly opposite to where you expect them to be. So 1 is where you expect 7 to be, and 7 is where you expect to find 1. Similarly, 3 and 9 have been swapped, as have 5 and 11. The first wheel has some letters showing traditional Western European note names, straight from high-tech monasteries of the Dark Ages. The names are confusing, but musicians still use them to communicate. Some pros, like Glenn Williams from the other videos, have memorized chords by the old names, by sound, and by muscle memory in their hands. I can't expect Glenn to start over, and I want to learn from him, so we used letter names a lot to communicate. I introduced letter names for hand shapes because this also has a practical purpose later on. But if you are starting from scratch and you can count to 12 and tell time, then you are already way ahead. With simple time calculations you can already do. That's all you need, but you can lose it to well-meaning people addicted to medieval confusion. I arbitrarily assigned middle C to 12 o'clock and just count frets from there. That leads to the placement of letters on the wheel, which you can start to memorize as long as it's not confusing. You should also know that sharp means add 1 or move 1 fret up on the fretboard, and flat means -1 or move 1 fret down on the fretboard. O'clock or medieval letter names are important in a band and essential in a large orchestra. Not so much for a solo player. That's because of the overwhelming importance of intervals in music. In the clock analogy, intervals are the number of hours between clock times. For instance, there are 6 hours between 3 o'clock and 9 o'clock. The o'clock time of an event works well for getting groups together, but as individuals, how many hours to go is top of mind as we prepare. Music is the same. Often the interval, the number of hours between notes, is most important. In Every Chord Ever, o'clock note names are found around the wheels and on the fretboard. The important number of hours between notes are built into the pieces that spin around the wheel. So let's take a look at them, starting with the 2-note pieces. Here. They are the building blocks for everything else. There are actually 2 important intervals that don't have pieces. Unison, meaning notes 0 hours apart, and octave, meaning 12 hours apart, or 1 complete trip around the wheel. These are important considerations in a song, but in general they don't give much trouble, and your ears are usually all you need to decide whether to step up or down an octave, or stay exactly where you are. As an exercise, you can spend some time rating all the intervals between 0 hours and 12 hours. Most people find 7-hour and 5-hour intervals the most pleasing, and the wheel is built around this. All neighbors on the wheel are 7 hours apart, or 5 hours apart going the other direction. Here's the piece representing one step around the wheel, called the circle step. In last place among the intervals for most people is 6 hours. Here it is, pointing to two notes as far apart as possible on the wheel. This piece is called the devil's interval, and it has X's and broken ends to remind you that it sounds broken. Now, the myth that it was banned in church for centuries may just amount to one pope's rant against the new music teens are listening to these days, but it is true that avoiding the devil's interval was a master composer's rule of thumb. Like most rules in music, breaking it can be fun, if you master the rule first and know exactly what you're doing. There are two other important intervals: square step, one step around a square, or 3 hours, and the triangle step, one step around an equilateral triangle, or 4 hours. Both of these sound nice in either direction. We get all of the other pieces by combining these as building blocks. For example, 2 circle steps can be stacked up like so. This points at 3 notes of the suspended or sustained chord. The sus chord contains 2 pleasing circle steps, but also an interval of 2 hours, which is okay but not great. The chord has a pleasing sound, but also a feeling we should move on to something a little better. The key piece can be seen as a 7-note series of circle steps. Let's take a closer look at it. When we choose a key, we are choosing 7 out of the possible 12 notes. So this seems to make a song easier for the ear to understand and enjoy. A key is big enough to contain all the intervals you might want to use, including the devil's interval, which is marked with X's on the key piece. The emoji faces mark the notes of the key, but also 7 possible starting notes or root notes around which a song can be built. The different starting points result in different musical feelings called modes, as suggested by the different facial expressions. Happy and sad are the 2 main modes in use today. If you want to avoid the devil's interval, then we can eliminate the notes marked with X's, giving 5 notes in a row in the middle of the key, called a pentatonic scale. If you stick to these notes in a solo, it is hard to go wrong. The ear finds the fewer notes easier to follow, and because they are all in a row, then the intervals inside are pretty safe. Stacking the other 2-note intervals creates other important 3-note chords. 2 square steps can be stacked up to create the diminished chord. This chord contains 2 pleasing square steps, but also the dangerous devil's interval. 2 triangle steps can be stacked up to create a 3-note chord with only pleasing intervals. But it soon becomes clear this chord will not fit within a key. These chords are important, but most important is how all of the best intervals can be stacked into one 3-note chord. Stack them all up like so, and we get the major shape containing them all. There is only one other way to do this, which is to flip everything over to get the minor shape. This shape and its mirror image are the most important and powerful 3-note chords. Major chords are generally thought to have a happy sound, and minor is sad. This is not always true, but is a common guiding principle. With these 3-note chords, the next logical step is 4-note chords. Stacking another piece on top of a chord usually leads to something richer or jazzy. definitely worth checking out, as long as it only uses up to 4 distinct notes, because 5-note chords generally do not work. There are too many intervals for the ear to make sense of, and it just sounds like a jumble. That's our deep dive into the wheel and pieces of Every Chord Ever. We will look at the fretboard and string sliders next, before getting back to working on a song. More details and a free downloadable worksheet you can print to follow along is available at wallymusic.com. Talk to you later.